Hi everyone, I just wanted to put together a quick little video for my birthday to say thanks for all the support and the kind words. Tonight, today, whichever time zone you're in, we have a few stories that just seem to hover on the outside of the usual. They're kind of unusual stories which might linger in your thoughts and play with your imagination. I hope you enjoy them, and a drink with me, as here's my shameless plug for the buy me a coffee, buy me a beer thing. It's never demanded or expected, but respected. Sorry. Anyway, I've realized that it was set at the highest level before. Fix that now, it's low. No pressure. Thanks always to each and every one of you for listening, liking, commenting, sharing, interacting with this video. Appreciate you all. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's get on to the spooky stories. When I was in elementary school, I was living with my dad. It was just me and him at home. Dad would make breakfast at 6 a.m. every morning and then rush off to work. Most of the time he would still be getting ready for work while he was eating. I would be left at home to get ready by myself and make my own way to school. I woke up one morning with a terrible headache, so I figured I wouldn't go to school that day. I didn't think it was a big deal to take the day off. I needed to recover. I hadn't skipped school before, but since my dad was always home late, I didn't think that he would even realize that I had been home all day. I was looking forward to a nice, relaxing day at home. I was wrong. My dad came home from work that day at around noon. I desperately tried to think of any kind of excuse as to why I was home. My dad was really hot on education, and I knew that I was in for a scolding. I went downstairs to see him, and he looked at me and smiled and said, "Let's go for a walk." I was really shocked by this. I didn't give it a second thought though. I just agreed to go with him. I was just glad I wasn't in trouble. I walked hand in hand with my father along a riverbank. I should say that he wasn't the type to walk hand in hand with his daughter, but for some reason that day he did. I can't really remember what we were talking about that day, but I remember smiling a lot. It was fun, and I didn't think it was strange at the time. After walking for a while, I felt my dad's grip around my hand increase. I felt my little hand getting squeezed tighter and tighter. I looked up at him and he was smiling. It was a very unnerving smile. He then started pulling me along as he began to walk faster. He started leading me down the riverbank towards the river's edge. I was a pretty tough and headstrong kid. I wasn't the type to cry, but that day I couldn't help it. My hand was hurting so much it felt like the bones were about to break. That wasn't the thing that made me cry though. I cried because of the way my dad smiled at me. It wasn't normal. It was horrible. It was unnatural. I really started screaming and crying loudly. Then my dad let go of my hand. I dropped down to the seat of my pants and kept right on crying. I couldn't bring myself to look at my dad's face. After a few minutes, someone tapped me on the shoulder and started speaking to me. It was an old woman. I didn't know who she was, but she tried to calm me down. She was gentle and kind. I couldn't stop crying though. My hand was throbbing, and when I looked up, I couldn't see my dad anywhere. With few options available to her, the old lady decided to take me to a nearby police box, and I thank her for that. I didn't know where I was. I was completely lost. I hadn't even been to that river before with my dad. I didn't know my address correctly either. All I could tell her and the officer was the name of the building I lived in with my dad. So we had to contact the landlord of my building. This happened a long time ago when we didn't even have a house phone. Once the landlord was contacted, he luckily knew where my dad worked from his tenancy documents, and then he called my dad's work. He didn't have anyone else to call. No mum on the scene, and I didn't have any older siblings. My dad told the officers that he would come pick me up. I started to get frightened again. When my dad arrived, I noticed something instantly. He was wearing the same clothes he left in the morning. He always came home in his work clothes. This was not the man who tried to lead me down the riverbank. The man who did that was wearing a polo shirt and some jeans I hadn't ever seen my dad wear before. My dad was really upset for me, and worried about me of course, but he was also frustrated that the landlord called his workplace. I don't know if his bosses gave him a hard time for leaving work early or something, but I quickly realized that this was my dad. I didn't need to wait and see him smile to realize the real him was back. I really don't know what happened that day. How that guy looked so much like my dad and had access to our home. I know I was young, and I guess that you'll probably think that I could have made a mistake. But let me ask you this. How many times have you ever mistook your father or mother for someone else while they were holding your hand? You'd know it was them, right? I don't know what that was, but sometimes I wonder when I think about all of the unsolved missing person cases out there. Something similar could have happened. I'd love to hear your theories. The other night I was heading home, and I saw a woman who looked a little worse for wear. Like she had too many on board. She was getting harassed by some guy, so I went over to see if she was alright, and to help her out. To cut a long story short, she grabbed my shirt as she was falling, and I think she gripped the pocket of my shirt or something because it ripped and tore a seam in the shirt. I was really annoyed and upset, to be honest. It was my favorite shirt. It was the last birthday present I ever got from my wife before she passed away. It genuinely upset me. But I guess there are worse ways to ruin a shirt. At least I was trying to help someone, and I didn't spill something on it, or rip it through my own clumsiness. Still, it was a shame, but it couldn't be helped. I decided to hang on to the shirt. Or maybe I should say, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I figured I could still use it as long as I didn't wear it outside of the house. I washed the shirt and I hung it up in the wardrobe. That night I had a dream. It was the first dream I had had in a very long time. I dreamt that I came home just as I did last night. But the only difference was I didn't come home to an empty home. I walked through the door and I saw my wife stood in the hallway. She was looking right at me. She looked at my shirt and tutted and said, "What's that?" She told me to give it to her. I took it off and she instantly went to work on it at the dining room table with a needle and a thread. I went upstairs to go change into another shirt and I came back down and sat on the sofa. I was looking over at her as she was working on sewing up my shirt, and that's all I remember. It was a nice dream. The next day I had plans with my daughter to go to the cinema and watch a movie and catch up. She's been living alone for a while. I was wondering what to wear. I opened my wardrobe as usual, and I noticed my favorite shirt. I took a look at it again, to see how bad the rip was, and to my surprise, I couldn't find it. I turned it over and over again in my hands, and I still couldn't find any tear in the fabric. I couldn't believe it. I looked at the back of the shirt and I noticed something. It was sewn up from the back so that the rip wasn't visible at the front. I wondered how the hell was this possible? And then I remembered my dream from last night, and I thought to myself, no way, she stitched it up for me. I didn't know how to comprehend the situation. It was so strange. I guess I knew what I was supposed to be wearing that day, so I took the shirt out of the wardrobe and threw it on. I told my daughter about my dream and the shirt. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, Dad, knowing you were probably drunk and imagined it. I bet there was no rip in the shirt." As she said this, I could see the tears welling in her eyes. I knew what she truly believed about my dream, even if she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. I was amazed. That's really the only word for it. I mean, I got to see my wife again, and my shirt was fixed. I'm still kind of speechless. That's just like her, you know, always helping me out in situations like that. I'm hoping that this could be a regular thing, because I tell you what, I'd love to come home one day and have some of her cooking waiting for me again. Or I'd love to even see it in the fridge. It might not happen that way, I guess, but hey, here's to hoping. Let me set the scene. This story begins at the base of a mountain in days long gone by. Not too far from the mountain is a village, and next to that village is a river. And legend goes that the river is home to a yokai, which loves to eat the livers of human beings. If you haven't heard of yokai before, let me do a quick explanation. Yokai are a class of supernatural beings and entities. They're not really demonic, they are more like spirits. They aren't always malevolent or mischievous, some are even helpful and friendly. They can appear as humanoid or animalistic. I guess they're not too dissimilar from cryptids, goblins, and fairies in that sense. It is said that the yokai from this story was a master of deceiving and tricking people who would pass by its river. Once it hurt or distracted its victims, it would lie in wait and scavenge from the bodies who succumb in the river or along the riverbanks. The story goes that after a while the creature seemed to have moved on from the village. Some locals claimed that they chased it away. Others simply didn't believe that it ever existed. I've always been curious about that story. Now I would like to take you to modern day world. 3 years ago, an old woman from our village was driving out by that river, and she got into an accident. She said that she suddenly lost consciousness while driving, and the next thing she knew, she woke up in a hospital bed. The road she was traveling down had a curve, but not a drastic one. Everyone was wondering how one could lose the control of their car on a mostly straight road. Luckily, she survived the crash, but unfortunately she suffered brain damage, and her speech was severely affected. There was another incident. An elderly man from the village had an accident along the riverbank. He lost consciousness while driving like the old woman, but he plunged into the river and sadly passed away. After this, heavier guardrails were installed along the road. And this year, a young man had an accident on that road. He was riding a motorbike at the time. There was no oncoming traffic. The victim's body was left mutilated and decapitated. When recovered from the water, it was said that internal organs were missing, including the liver. Perhaps if the guardrail wasn't that strong, his injuries wouldn't have been that devastating. That's what some people believe. When I heard the news, I remembered something about that place. I thought to myself, wasn't that place where the old lady had an accident a few years back? It freaked me out a bit. I realized that the accidents were seemingly happening in the same spot. I couldn't ask those who passed away about what caused their fateful crashes, but I found it very strange that all of the afflicted suddenly lost consciousness on the road. Or perhaps they saw something. According to the folktales from days gone by about this area, the yokai wasn't killed, it just went away. I wonder if it did go away. I don't know, maybe it's back, maybe it never left. Has some sort of ritual taken place here, or was the river always cursed? Sorry, there really isn't an ending here like in the movies or the comics. I just found it mysterious that these incidences have been happening. I'm not sure if I can believe that the accidents are just a coincidence.